the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Who can be elected pope? Because let's face it, there will be a conclave in the not too distant future. We will have a new pope in the not too distant future. And it's not as though suddenly now people are beginning to think about, well, who might that new pope be? What kind of pope would we like? What kind of pope would the church benefit from? That's all speculation, of course, and we won't know until we know. But there's nothing undue or improper in at least looking forward and saying, after the coming 9 days of preparing for the state funeral of Pope Francis, there will be a number of things that always happen like clockwork after a pope passes away, and that's done in preparation for giving him the dignified burial, committing him to eternity, prayers for his soul, etc. And then, of course, the church and the world looks forward to the next phase, which is then comes the conclave. Then comes the big news, hopefully in the not too distant future after the conclave begins, as to who will be the next pope. So who's eligible? It might surprise you to know that any baptized Catholic male is eligible to be elected pope. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, and I'll get to those, but the Church's law, this is in Canon 332, subsection 1, it doesn't give any restrictions as far as who could be elected to be pope. It doesn't restrict it just to bishops, certainly not just to cardinals. Any baptized Catholic male, at least in theory, can be validly elected pope. So male means women, because women are ineligible for ordination. And in order to be the Bishop of Rome, you have to be ordained a deacon, then a priest, and then consecrated as a bishop. Non-Catholics are ineligible. I think that's fairly obvious. Non-baptized people are ineligible. So what about a lapsed Catholic? What about an excommunicated Catholic? Theoretically, I think somebody could say, well, it's possible because he is a baptized Catholic male. That doesn't change if you're lapsed. And by lapsed, that means that you've fallen away from the faith. You've stopped going to Mass. You've stopped praying. You've stopped following Jesus. Or maybe you think you're following Jesus now on a different path, but you've left the Catholic Church. That's not going to happen. Somebody who's a lapsed Catholic or somebody who's experienced excommunication is not going to be, practically speaking at least, elected to be the next pope, but any baptized male can be. Now, what else is required? Well, you have to be willing to accept it. So in order for an election of a new pope to be valid, the man who is elected has to freely accept it. And if he says no, then it's an invalid election. Then you move on to the next candidate with the next most votes. Typically, that's how it would go. If the man who is elected pope is not in holy orders, because I asked rhetorically, could Cyrus Simcoe, a baptized Catholic, could he become elected as the next pope? Theoretically, yes. But I think practically speaking, the answer is a solid no, because he would have to end the time of being married and living as married with his wife. He would continue to be married, but he wouldn't be living with his wife anymore, because he would be ordained as a deacon and then as a priest. He'd become a cleric, obviously. He would be consecrated a bishop. And the key to remember is that to be pope, you are the Bishop of Rome, the successor of St. Peter. And in order to be a bishop, you have to have been ordained to the sacrament of holy orders at its highest level. So in practice, okay, so that's in theory, but what about in practice? In actual fact, practically speaking, who is going to be elected? It was almost certainly be among the number of the College of Cardinals. Now, the number of the College of Cardinals fluctuates, and even within the College of Cardinals, 80 years of age is the cutoff date for voting in an election. Now, in theory, I mean, a man who's 80 or above could be elected pope. So that's not impossible. Some people say, what about some of the candidates who will be going into the conclave in the coming weeks who are 78, 79? I mean, it's only a matter of time before we know, but the thing to remember is that Pope Francis himself, of course, he reigned for 12 years. He died when he was that died today, of course, when he was 88 years of age. So he already himself was an elderly man when he was elected pope. I think some people, back in 2013, I remember hearing this, some people thought, well, he'll be a caretaker pope. And the assumption was that he might reign for a few years and perhaps his health would fail and he would die. The average life expectancy generally is for males right around the age of 80. So I think some people surmised that Pope Francis's pontificate would be short. It turned out to be longer than many people thought it might be. So that's one more reason to think about when the time comes. We're still just now in the beginning of the process of mourning the passing of Pope Francis. We're not, let's not be hasty. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, etc. But it's also not undue or improper to say, well, what's the next step after the next 9 days of mourning for Pope Francis? The next step is the preparation for the conclave. So practically speaking, it will be one of the members of the College of Cardinals. And the current electors who are under the age of 80, those are the ones who have the prerogative to vote in the conclave. If you're above the age of 80, you don't have the prerogative to vote. But it doesn't mean that you couldn't be elected bishop. If the conclave were to elect a man who's not a bishop, he would be consecrated a bishop immediately. Let's say he's a parish priest. He would be consecrated a bishop if he says yes to the request, and he'd be consecrated a bishop nearly immediately. There have been some examples of this. So Pope Urban VI, he was pope in the year 1378. He was not a cardinal, he was a bishop, and he was elected pope. And a rare example would be Pope Celestine V. Back in 1294, he wasn't a cardinal, he wasn't even a bishop, he was a monk living in obscurity, praying and fasting, and nobody really gave him much thought, but the bishops who assembled to have the conclave then elected him out of obscurity. There, according to Canon Law, there's some other provisions here. So even among baptized Catholic men, Canon Law says there are certain impediments that would prevent you from being validly elected pope. Excommunication is one. Now, that can be lifted. It can be absolved, and the excommunication could be lifted. I can't imagine a scenario where that might happen. Mental incapacity or public heresy. That's another thing. If somebody is publicly spouting heresy, he would not be eligible to be elected pope. And there could be other irregularities such as formal schism or simony, like buying or selling of church offices, etc. So a quick rule of thumb is who can be elected pope? A baptized male Catholic who is not of any particular age, and he must freely accept the election.